Would you like to play a game?
Hey, what are you doing?
I'm doing the intro for the.
We're not doing an intro this week. The intros have gotten way too long.
But I did my makeup.
Can you just do the like, comment, subscribe thing, please?
Okay. Like, comment, and subscribe.
Hey everyone. If you like this video, make sure to give it a like and a comment. If you want to see more from me, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Also, this video is going to contain spoilers for basically every Saw movie. And these movies are violent, so I'm going to be discussing a lot of different types of violence. Although I will do my best to keep it PG-13. I recently revisited the Saw franchise. More specifically, I rewatched Saw 1 through 3, each of which I had seen once as a teenager. Then I watched, for the first time, Saw 4, 5, 6, 3D, and even Jigsaw, the 2017 reboot of the franchise. The first 7 movies were all released between 2004 and 2010, one movie each year. They all follow and contribute to a single narrative, and most importantly, follow a specific set of rules. The most recent, Jigsaw, fails to follow these rules, so we're going to pretend it's not canon. I approached this essay expecting to watch a corny series of blood and guts movies, which were fun but little else. And don't get me wrong, these movies are corny. They all exist in this very particular pop culture moment with the gritty realism we all loved so much after 9/11. But before comic book movies convinced us that all movies need to be aware of the fact that they're movies. No. These movies are so self-serious, but it's actually kind of refreshing to take a step back to 2004. And what's more, the filmmakers obviously have a great respect for storytelling. Rather than each sequel being a direct linear continuation of the story, each movie contributes to the lore of every movie before it. Rather than linear storytelling, I'm imagining it as radial storytelling. If we start with Saw as a circle, each sequel is a larger concentric circle, contributing to the forward narrative, as well as the backstory, as well as the events we've seen in previous movies. I don't really want to show any clips from the actual movies, because then people are less likely to watch this when they eat a meal. And I hate that when I've got my din-din and I sit down to eat and I'm scrolling through YouTube trying to find something good, and I find something good, but it's just not something I want to watch while I eat. You know when that happens? Anyway, I'll summarize real quick. Each movie follows the same basic formula. An older, eccentric man with seemingly unlimited resources brings a group of younger people who he deems to be impure to his workshop, where each person faces a series of trials corresponding to their perceived sins. Most fail the test and are never heard from again, but the few who survive end up carrying on the work of the mastermind. Obviously, in the Saw movies, there's a lot more blood and guts, but we're basically talking about Willy Wonka here. I really love these movies, and if you're okay with a little bit of gore, I highly recommend at least watching the first one. In fact, I believe Saw was the second horror movie I ever saw after The Village. And I remember both of those movies so fondly, but looking back at The Village...
I am a professor. I teach American history at the University of Pennsylvania. I have an idea.
Yikes. Now, clearly I enjoyed revisiting Saws 1 through 3 a lot more than I did The Village, but there was still something a little bit off. It didn't exactly age well, and not just in the ways you might expect.
I didn't tell you that my last girlfriend, who was a feminist vegan punk, broke up with me because she thought I was too angry.
I remember, as an edgy teenager, kind of sympathizing with the villain. He was a man who experienced a great deal of hardship and was testing the broken souls around him. As he explained over and over again, he never wanted to kill anyone. He just needed to break these people down to make them gain a new appreciation for life.
I've never murdered anyone in my life. The decisions are up to them.
Like I mentioned, I think Saw comes from a very particular flavor of post 9/11 sentiment. And clearly Jigsaw's MO reflects this. That's the main villain. I realize this is the first time I've called him by name. Jigsaw is the main villain. This is Jigsaw. He makes it clear that it is his moral code who will decide who lives and dies, because everyone else is corrupt. Every cop, judge, civil servant, and lawyer we see, they're all guilty of gross miscarriages of justice. Jigsaw is rebelling against an unjust justice system and taking matters into his own hands. Granted, I never thought it was okay what he was doing, but he wasn't some irredeemable evil like we had in the 90s. He had a philosophy that valued life, and he only tested those he deemed most ungrateful of the life they lead. His only crime was carrying out Jigsaw justice. So what crimes does he deem worthy of his torture? Well, his first round of victims are an adulterer, a voyeur, and a man with a severe inferiority complex. Yup, that's right, one of the 3 main victims in the first movie is punished for having low self-esteem. And now that I'm thinking about it, the voyeur was just being hired to take photos of the adulterer. But also the adulterer's wife and daughter get kidnapped as part of the test. What was their crime? Well, I crunched the numbers. Across the first 7 Saw films, there are 76 unique victims. By victim, I'm including anyone that was forced into a test or trap against their will. Of those victims, 68 are masterminded by our primary villain Jigsaw, while the remaining 8 were masterminded by his successor. Now, each victim was tested for a reason, and there are about 18 reasons a victim might be tested. Or more simply, we've got 7 which might fall under abuse of power or corruption. 35 have committed actual crimes or otherwise hurt people. 4 were targeted for the purposes of revenge. 4 we just don't know. 7 are mental health related, whether drugs, self-harm, or just a personality flaw. And 19 are just straight up victims. Maybe they were related to a bad person, or they were framed by a bad person, or they're just exploited workers. So about 46 victims were bad people, and 26 were just victims. That's not a great ratio. And I know, my categories are somewhat arbitrary, but that's kind of the point. This whole thing is arbitrary. Disregarding the fact that at least 8 of them have already served time in prison, Jigsaw's pseudo-justice system has no due process. The only people making the decisions about what constitutes a punishable offense are the ones carrying out the punishments. And to even have this conversation, we need to take Jigsaw at his word that these people even did what he said they did, with few exceptions. And even assuming that, I think anyone would agree it's pretty uncool to torture the children of the criminals, like he does in Saw, and Saw 2, and Saw 3, and Saw 4. I'm starting to think this serial killer isn't such a great guy. So these 46 bad folks, what kind of crimes did they get into? Let's look at William Easton. Easton was a health insurance executive who had a habit of denying sick people coverage because he was unable to make money off of them. An apt villain in 2009. So he gets put through a series of trials, the first of which is to outlast an elderly smoker in a breath-holding competition. And that guy's crime? Well, he was the janitor at the insurance company. Like, he was a member of the working class who was cleaning toilets to survive, and he smokes cigarettes maybe because of the whole exploited labor thing, and so Jigsaw is like, who can breathe better, an elderly smoker or this guy? In the next test, Easton has to decide between letting his secretary die or his file clerk die. But one of them has to die. Easton cannot save both of them. Easton's final test, his real test, is to beg forgiveness from the family of a man who died because he couldn't get health insurance from Easton's company. And surprise, they kill him because they didn't want him to keep doing capitalism to sick people. So, of course, they kill him, which is kind of the biggest failure of Jigsaw's games. Jigsaw, over and over again, insists that he wants his victims to survive.
He's testing us. He wants us to survive this.
Because only then will they have a proper appreciation for life. Except there are really only two types of traps. Either you destroy your own body to survive, or you destroy someone else's body to survive. I mean, in the first movie, he tests someone who self-harms by placing them in a giant pile of barbed wire. And then he's like, get out in 2 hours or don't. Was he supposed to be able to survive? And at what cost? So yeah, maybe Jigsaw isn't such a sympathetic villain. When I rewatched the first 3 movies, I felt a great deal of nostalgia for the characters, the storytelling, the editing, the cinematography, but there was a disconnect with how I remembered the moral center. Jigsaw isn't some righteous vigilante. In fact, he seems to emulate the very justice system he hates so much. He forces those who have broken his law to destroy their body for the false promise of rehabilitation. Over and over again, Jigsaw proves that he doesn't actually care for justice or even for helping people. All he cares about is his legacy.
What is the cure for cancer, Eric? The answer is immortality. By creating a legacy, by living a life worth remembering, you become immortal.
Which is interesting to say the least. Because I've been going on and on about nostalgia and the impact that the Saw movies have had on my life. And we get to watch Jigsaw's legacy age in real time. In an era of preemptive war and enhanced interrogation, Jigsaw's idea of justice was fairly normalized. But in 2020, we the people are getting slightly less okay with destroying bodies in the name of justice. Because culture changes, values develop over time, and legacies fade. But some among us cling on bitterly to these fading legacies, like Christopher Columbus or Robert E. Lee, or even the legacy of our founding fathers, a legacy so infallible, so ironclad, that there is an entire legal ideology dedicated to not allowing any of their ideas to be changed or reinterpreted. Except for the fact that our culture loves to reinterpret legacies. Stalin was just a terrible, terrible person, and because he was so terrible, we will never fall prey to the socialist horrors of Medicare for all. The legacy of Dr. King gets whitewashed, so we think of him as a sweet little Southern reverend, instead of a literal radical leftist who fought for the rights of oppressed, exploited, and impoverished people. Or we refuse to hold people accountable because, well, they contributed to the culture, so we can't just erase their legacy. And maybe Jigsaw's legacy, rather than being some righteous crusader for justice, maybe he just gives us an excuse to watch people get hurt. Because at the end of the day, he doesn't give a damn about justice. He just wants to preserve his legacy. I think for its time, Saw was one of the most creative and forward-thinking horror movies, but even so, it represents an incredibly flawed idea of justice. Before rewatching the first Saw, I was excited to indulge in a villain who rejected the justice system that had so often failed him and his country. But I was nostalgic for a Saw that never existed, just like we so often yearn for a past United States that never was. The United States never was a place for liberty and justice for all. And it's clear that those who claim to be in it to help people may not actually be concerned about much more than their legacy. Because if they were, they would have done what so many other leaders have done across the globe. But they haven't. And they probably won't. And that will be their legacy.